Now, which way is the battle going to go in the Ukraine? After, having, destroyed both the Ukrainian counteroffensive of the 9 and 10 Corps last year, Russia has now totally regained the initiative. It is now pushing ahead on almost the entire front. And with every passing day, its superiority in artillery. And now, so far, the Russian tactical aviation was not able to intervene very effectively because of very dense and very lethal air defense environments over Ukraine. And, with the Patriots, with the S-300s, with the Stinger missiles, etc., a whole layer of these defenses, it was very difficult for any air force, including the Russian, and even the American Air Force would have problems in this kind of a dense, lethal air defense environment. Operating against Afghanistan and operating against Libya and operating against Iraq is one thing. Taking on the Russians or the Chinese, it will be totally a different ball game. They also haven't been exposed to this high-intensity level of conflict. Winning low-intensity conflict wars and extrapolating their results to high-intensity conflicts of this intensity can be an invitation to disaster. So the fact is that the Russians have now perfected the Fab 2000, Fab 3000 glide-toss bombs, added, their GLONASS GPS kind of guidance kit, satellite navigation kits onto them, and they are inflicting a lot of damage. The Battle of Avdiivka was won by the massive application of these glide-toss bombs. And this could also help the Russians to capture Kharkiv and make major gains in the east, where they are making a major push. They have created a fourth army, the Eastern Army. Apart from the V and the K and the others, they are now, an E has been added to their army groupings. What are the Russians waiting for? They are waiting for, the muddy season of spring to get over, and it's already at its last phases. This makes the ground very rushy, very slushy, very muddy. Tanks tend to bog down. They cannot operate off the road axes, and therefore the ideal campaign season, in Russia, in that part of the world, is May, June, preferably June, July, August, before the autumnal rain start and then the snow season starts. But the fact of the matter is that the Russians were eagerly waiting for the ground to harden, for their tanks to maneuver. They had, like I said, in 2022 itself been forced to mobilize 300,000 reservists. They have another 300,000 call-ups on their, they have conscripted them, and there are reports that they are calling up more people and they are readying for an offensive. They have raised 2 combined armies for heavy offensives, and they have created a flotilla for operations in the Dnipro. This is very interesting. So, any time now in May end or in June, we were anticipating the Russian counter-offensive, which is also they have been preparing for quite some time. It is the standard Russian operational art practice to absorb the enemy counter-offensive, inflict heavy losses, and then turn and go on to the counter-offensive. That counter-offensive has long been awaited. It has been over a year plus in the preparation and making. So when will that happen? I have a feeling that the Russians may well be forced to prepone the counter-offensive. You see, the simple fact is that the Americans thought that by forcing Russia into a fight, they would get a chance to impose massive economic sanctions against Russia, and that would derail the Russian economy. Like in 1990-91, what they had done to the Soviet Union, they would have repeated with the Russian Federation. I'm afraid it didn't quite work that way. The Russian economy today is better off than it was at the start of the war. The oil sanctions, etc., just failed to work because Europe itself is buying tons and tons, thousands and thousands of tons of natural gas, and it is buying back, Russian oil which has been refined in India and elsewhere. And the simple fact is that Europe itself hasn't stopped buying Russian oil and gas directly or indirectly, right? And yet there have been Western threats onto India to stop buying Russian oil. Now, why the hell shouldn't we buy cheap oil? Why should we spend where the Europeans are not prepared to cut costs or to not bear that pain of the sanctions? So the fact of the matter is that the Russian economy hasn't taken a hit. Russia has emerged, frankly, much stronger than earlier, and all thoughts that Putin will flee or fly or there will be a coup, he will be deposed, he will be, all these were figments of the imagination. It's a bad thing if you start believing your own propaganda narratives. There were strong information warfare narratives of an impending collapse of Russia. I'm afraid they have turned out to be so much subjective nonsense. In war, you have to be objective, you have to be realist, and I'm afraid there are sectors of planning which are going further and further away from reality into their, their created artificial intelligence kind of created realities which they are trying to foster onto the world. But what is real is real. What is on the ground is on the ground. And on the ground, the Russians have totally regained the offensive. They are preparing for a counteroffensive. Now, the end state, after all this beating and when the reality check began to sink in, the Americans, the NATO decided that the outcome that would now suit them would be an armed peace like what has happened in the Koreas. They'd like to freeze the conflict where it is. I'm afraid that also may not be possible now. And to threaten the Russians, and they did threaten the Russians quite seriously and have possibly helped to delay the Russian reaction and counteroffensive, because the Russians have been trying to find out what the hell is going on. There began very irresponsible. Firstly, the Americans and NATO carried out a major exercise on the borders of Russia. Almost about 90,000 troops were mobilized, army, air forces, navies were mobilized, brought close to, Estonia, Romania, etc., etc. This exercise was designed to, deter the Russians from launching a major offensive that would give a knockout blow to the Ukrainians. They wanted to freeze the conflict here, and they were trying to warn the Russians that there could be absolutely unprecedented consequences if Russia pressed ahead with its offensive. There were even threats that the French, who had been the most reasonable so far, who had been talking of talks and all that, who had taken the initiatives to diffuse the crisis at the start, and President Macron had gone out of his way to go to Russia, meet Putin, etc. Now suddenly we find the French turning the biggest hawks in Europe, and they were threatening to put boots on the ground as some kind of a tripwire. The Russians signaled, you put boots on the ground and we will kill them, we will destroy them, which will lead to a direct clash between NATO boots on the ground and Russian boots on the ground. All this talk that they would be in Western Ukraine, that they would just relieve the army and police of Ukraine in the Western Ukraine part of it, Central Ukraine part of it, to fight, get into the meat grinder, they would stay the hell out, and they would hope like hell that they would be not bombed, is subjective. Is very, very tenuous basis to make military plans on. Whatever you put as tripwire is likely to get destroyed, and the Russians are in a position to destroy such, forward tripwire contingents. 2,000 or 12,000, whatever it is, they can be destroyed. And they will be destroyed, and that would mean a direct clash between Russia and NATO, and that could any day escalate into a tactical nuclear conflagration. And once that happens, there is no way of saying which way it will go. Unlike World War I and World War II, here the consequences could be planetary suicide. So all these silver bullets, magic bullet solutions, oh, we've got the solution. In the World War I, amazing but true, it was said that the British and the French had invented a new technique of bayonet fighting which would win the war. I mean, today you can laugh at such preposterous, fantastical notions. But I think what we are suggesting now is no better. So I'm afraid you will only force Russia to prepone its offensive, and if there is any move into the Ukraine war, putting boots on the ground, which Biden had said was an absolute no, 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 he has retracted from each one of his no's. This one could be dangerous. It could lead to uncontrolled escalation. Whether you want it in an election year, I think it's for the Americans to decide. But prudence, I would advise that even at this stage, if they can go for a negotiated settlement, peace between Russia and Ukraine, it would be the wisest thing, the kindest thing for the people of Ukraine who are being treated like cannon fodder, like lambs to the slaughter. It's not fair. It's not fair. You see, pushing more and more Ukrainians into the meat grinder, you could suddenly find a collapse of morale. You could suddenly see a collapse of morale. Already units are surrendering en masse. Azov battalions, Nazi battalions, are refusing to attack. The Hamas war, Israel-Hamas war, is into its 6 months. As we all know, it started with a dastardly Hamas attack on Israeli civilians, 1,200 killed, 300 plus taken hostages, and out of them 140 odd, 139 we are told are still hostages with Hamas. Hamas is hanging on to them as its major trump card to save itself. So where is that war gone? You know, the Israelis use the AI software, artificial intelligence software called Lavender, which does facial recognition. And they have mapped the entire Hamas hierarchy, Hamas armed members, etc. They claim that out of 25, 26 brigades, they have destroyed 19. But the simple fact is that the top Hamas leadership, immediately before or after the 7th October dastardly strike, had gone into underground tunnels and had planned to stay there for well over a year. They are well stocked, they are inside there. Their people may be starving and dying. Those leaders who plotted this 7th October mass murder are well underground in the tunnels. Initially, we heard reports that the Israelis wanted to flood these tunnels with seawater, with sewage water, and flush these people out. But they can't do that. Simple reason, because the hostages are also down in the tunnels. And it would have to be a brave Israeli regime which would say that to hell with the hostages, we will like to get that. They cannot. They value lives in Israel, and each life matters. It's a country with a very small population, so they haven't been able to do that. That means you haven't been able to get at the top Hamas leadership. Yes, they have killed a whole lot of OGWs, second, third tier, their foot soldiers, etc. The collateral damage now is supposed to be 34,000 Palestinians killed. How many of them are top Hamas commanders? Barring one or two. We did get the sons of Haniyeh and some top commanders or top commanders who came out of their mole tunnels, but they popped up and they got killed. But the best of software can't detect people underground, and there is a lot of quite obviously you wouldn't want to waste precision guided munitions on low level Hamas cadres, so you use dumb bombs, which leads to a lot of collateral damage, which is proving to be very counterproductive. All the sympathy that Israel had gained, the public sympathy, I mean, it's all gone. Because now Israel is being, accused of genocide. Israel is being accused of revenge strikes against the punishment of the Palestinian population, etc., without being able to strike out the head of the snake, which is underground, deep underground. So you have a problem there that you call it off, and you within a month or 2 months you could have rocket strikes coming onto Israel again, and asking leading people to question what the hell did we do all these months? What about all this bombing and killing? What has it really achieved? You see, that is the basic problem. But The only way out of that for Israel is what Netanyahu is suggesting. He wants to now go into Rafah. That means displacing again those 1.2 million refugees which are crowded there. And when you launch those operations, there could be massive collateral damage, and which would make it worse for Israel in terms of public image, in terms of information warfare, in terms of narratives, in terms of global sympathy and support. But Israel has to cater for its security, and Netanyahu is prepared now, he is desperate enough, it looks, to go to any length. So they are planning to go into Rafah. They are building an alternative tented city where they hope to shift the population from the refugee camps in Rafah and go in for the last bastion of the Hamas. How many of them are still there? Those who see the blow coming, how many of them are still there? Would they have gotten into their underground tunnels like moles and slipped away into the underground maze? It's a difficult situation for Israel. The Houthis, surprisingly, they have done the most damage to the international shipping in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. Now they're trying to step into the Indian Ocean region, and over 100 plus attacks on international shipping. They've forced all container and cargo ships and oil carriers, to go around the Cape of Good Hope, adding to travel time, insurance costs, etc. And price of oil is hovering above $90 a barrel. It's a miracle that it didn't go up, and that is because the Iran-Israel conflict de-escalated. But any time if the balloon goes up there, you will have the next oil shock, which could derail the global economy, push it back into recession, finish whatever recovery we have seen so far. What Israel is doing is now it is switching its forces to the Hezbollah. It is mobilized. It cannot keep repeating the mobilizations again and again. And Israel is in a mood to try and finish up most of its dirty work that has to be done. So there is a school of thought that let's take care of Hezbollah also in this. Problem is, Hezbollah is a formidable military force, much stronger than the Hamas. It has proven battle track record. The last invasion of Lebanon was extremely costly. The counterfactual is also there. It also imposed caution on the Hezbollah, the punishment that they got. They not very easily take up the next war with Israel. But the fact of the matter is, things could escalate and go out of hand on the Hezbollah front. Already Israel has had to vacate 70,000 people from northern Israel. How long you can do that? How long you can sustain the mobilization? How long can the Israeli economy take it? So far they have 100% backing from the United States. Now we are seeing disturbing developments in the United States where the Palestinian students, the Muslims that they had brought in, in that woke liberalism phase, now there is hell to pay on their campuses. It is almost giving the look of the Vietnam War, a kind of a popular campus rebellion against America's support, unqualified support to Israel. These are dicey trends. Now, quickly I'd like to cover, because I have covered it in detail earlier, Israel-Iran conflict. For the time being, the world has heaved a sigh of relief that it is over. I am not sure how long that will last. Simple. With the escalatory dynamics in the Middle East, this could flare up again, any time. Iran, Israel. What dangerous lesson the military planners must learn all over the globe is, there are no leak-proof anti-ballistic missile shields. Iran fired 7 missiles onto the Nevatim air base, 5 got through. And similarly for the Ramon air base, similarly for the 8200 intelligence collection unit in the Golan Heights. If out of 7, 5 got through, these were conventional tipped warheads. What if it was you were trying to stop a nuclear attack? Even if 1 got through, it is a disaster. It means your ABM shield has failed. So anti-ballistic missile defenses are the ultimate panacea and we can now risk a nuclear war because we'll be able to stop them all. I'm sorry, you won't. I'm sorry, you won't. That is the prime military lesson. Simple countermeasures on the Russian missiles, Chinese missiles, Iranian missiles. Just add a booster rocket that separates the warhead from the main carrier missile and also fires a couple of decoys, and you've beaten most of the most advanced air defenses in the world, which were linked to the American anti-ballistic missile shield with its headquarters in Colorado, with satellite imagery, with computation facilities of the United States, their supercomputers, everything added, 2 Aegis class destroyers, over the horizon X-band radars, everything failed to make it a leak-proof umbrella. Of course, they stopped 97 to 98%. The problem is the dangerous 3% that got through, which were the missiles. The drones are expendable. So you can take satisfaction, you can tell your people, oh, we shot down 98%, 97%, but the simple fact is the 3% that got through is, if it was a nuclear scenario, disaster. Disaster. With the most expensive ballistic missile shields, you can court disaster. If out of 7 missiles, 5 can penetrate through to the most heavily defended air defense target in the world, what about if those were nuclear armed missiles coming towards the United States? Could you countenance 5 out of 7 missiles getting through? And they just fired about 300 drones cum missiles. What if they had fired 1,500? They would saturate your anti-ballistic missile defense. Great lessons to be learned. India is also investing heavily in anti-ballistic missile shields. And if you start putting more money into anti-ballistic missile shields vis-a-vis nuclear weapons to deter, nuclear warheads to deter, India and Pakistan are almost equal in terms of nuclear warheads. Of course, our warheads are much heavier than their Pakistani, sub-kiloton warheads. 1.5 pawa, 2 pawa, sort of joke of a tactical nuclear arsenal that they are talking of. But the fact is, there is reason to think and pause and reflect. Now, let me come to the last sector. That is China, Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea. Major flashpoint on the brink of eruption. Last year, there were reports, there were speculations that given the fact that the United States was so heavily bogged down in Russia, Ukraine, in the Middle East, the Chinese would take advantage of this and strike. Like in 1962, don't forget, when the Cuban Missile Crisis was there between the Soviet Union and the United States, the Chinese took advantage of it to hit India in Nifa and Ladakh. We haven't forgotten that. So can the Chinese do it again? That is their standard way of thinking. They were thinking of it. There are pretty close indications that they were thinking of it. But China had chickened out. Blunt, straightforward. And why? Because the Americans have countered them. They have built bases in the Philippines, which are just 600 miles from the southern Chinese cities, which can play merry hell into any Chinese naval armada that seeks to overwhelm Taiwan, attack Taiwan, or even blockade Taiwan. So for the time being, the Chinese have chickened out. Once again, the key phrase is for the time being. Will the Chinese give it up at that? Last November, Xi Jinping had gone to the United States and there was some tough, blunt talking, signaling, don't do it kind of a thing. And China seems to have backed down for the time being. But there is a new flashpoint emerging there. China is quite incensed that Philippines has given its land and its naval bases to the Americans in a very major way to stymie any plans, Chinese plans to attack across the Taiwan Strait, those 100 miles of sea. Very, very major obstacle. Massive water bodies prevent any such, make any such armed, amphibious invasions a very difficult proposition. It took the Americans also 2 to 3 years to mount the Normandy landings. So the Chinese have a very difficult Hobson's choice. But the fact is, just because of that, will they take it out? Will they have a preliminary clash with Philippines? Will they have a preliminary clash with the Philippines to, as they say, set the stage or to shape the battlefield? I think the preliminary step would have to be to either put so much pressure on the Philippines that it forces the American bases out of there. And, the Philippines is forced to deliberate and change course. Even the Japanese have come down on their islands, have mounted cruise missiles on their island. They've copied the Chinese playbook and given it back to them. So one, will China try to have a preliminary engagement to test its armed forces? They haven't fought for almost close to half a century. So will it straight away try and push them into the big battle or have some probing engagements? If there are going to be probing engagements, where could they be? Against Philippines, number one. Against India, number two. That's where we need to wake up and smell the coffee. Whichever way you look at it, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid the world is headed for very troubled times. And if a shooting World War III erupts, I would not in the least be surprised. It is not a happy denouement. And even now, it's not too late. And ensure that we don't slide down that slippery road to war, Armageddon, and worse. Thank you.